Thank you so much for joining in. Welcome everyone from multiple parts of the world. Um, Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Rajeev. I'm going to be the host for this particular session. I am chuffed to be presenting and representing AI Dome, a newly formed organization or a frontier that we created a few months ago, bringing together the sharpest minds of the world in the field of testing, test security, and trying to get together thoughts and ways in which we can keep our exams secure. I am happy to present a few of my co-board members from the AI Dome. Liberty Munson from Microsoft. She's been a veteran in the field of assessments and testing. She heads as Psychometrics there. Paul Muir from risr, multiple experiences across various assessment organizations and an expert joining in from the UK. And Sundar, who has been a veteran and a pioneer in the field of training and certification. Very happy to have Sundar as well here. So the topic that we are trying to talk about today is a very potent topic, something that's been in the news recently and something that we believe at AI Dome should be addressed very importantly. That's about how trust, defensibility, and credibility can be built into agentic AI. As testing has changed, as testing has moved over the decades, you've seen tests moving from a paper-based assessment to a computer-based assessment to an online assessment, and today remotely delivered as well. And while all of that is happening, we are also seeing the inseparable part of testing, which is the proctoring part of it or the security part of it, moving from proctors that moved in between aisles where you took exams sitting on your benches to proctors remotely monitoring you over CCTV or camera, to the current day where agentic AI agents actually monitor you. There's a bunch of things that are moved, and all of this obviously enabled to a large extent by the technology that has moved at a very frenetic pace over the last few years. But what's also happened the last few months, especially, is a bunch of speed bumps that have hit some of these things, and we're going to discuss some of these elements today as we talk about defensibility, credibility of exams itself. We are no longer dealing with isolated cheating. Cheating and trying to break through the exams has always been a part, and that's the reason proctoring has always been there. But recently, what you're seeing is something that is not the normal. It is AI led. It's way beyond just impersonation. We're dealing with coordinated AI assisted behavior that is adaptive, scalable, and often invisible, and that makes it very, very potent for us to figure out what to do about it. Take a few examples. Maybe about 8 weeks ago, one of the largest exam bodies, ACCA, said they're going to go back to in-premise testing from remote online because quote unquote, from their own CEO's words, the sophistication of the cheating systems is so high, is far outpacing what can be put in terms of safeguards. So they don't trust their own systems to be able to handle some of these cheating methodologies that's come into place. And that's not just a one-off case. There are so many cases. There are murmurs of many online remote examinations going back. They're trying to go back to classroom-based testing and so on and so forth. But what's been sacrificed? Remote online testing actually brought in a lot of benefits, from scale to global access, cost savings, and more importantly, things like opportunities for students with disabilities and so on and so forth. Are we going to throw all of this back and go back to the old ways where all of this didn't exist? Or do we find ways of how we can make this work? Organizations today are not questioning the technology itself, but I think that they are questioning their ability to go in front of legal authorities, that they question the ability to defend decisions that AI has taken. And when these authorities ask for these questions, they're not able to provide the right answers. And I think that's where the key element exists today. The pattern is therefore definitely clear. Organizations deploy AI detection systems, but struggle to defend the decisions that these systems influence when challenged. The panel is sitting today with just one simple main question to ask: can agentic AI be designed in such a way with defensibility built in as the first principles at the core, rather than as an afterthought? We're not looking at whether AI can scale up, can do a lot of things, provide more technological elements, but we are looking at how do you build that trust into it. Can we defend? Can we build defenses into something that we are currently looking to automate? I think that's the key question. The panel is talking fundamentally about credibility as a prerequisite for adoption. So with this framing, let me start off by asking each of you a simple question. What is the single biggest risk of getting agentic AI wrong, in securing high-stake examinations? Maybe we can start with Liberty.
So I think the biggest risk probably comes from making a mistake and revoking somebody's credential when it shouldn't have been revoked. Because when somebody has one of those credentials, there are high stakes decisions that potentially are made. So we need to make sure we're making the right decision when we use AI to help us decide if somebody has violated an exam rule, because there are real consequences to people's real lives if we make a mistake.
Absolutely, absolutely. Paul, what's your view?
I think mine was more of a, I completely agree with Liberty on that one. I think mine was maybe a bit more provocative, sort of the destruction of like the learning spirit in some case. So if you imagine as a student, if you're sitting there thinking, actually, I'm being monitored by an agentic AI, bit of kit or, tool. And it's almost like an invisible like predator watching you, stalking you, every little micro expression you might do. Actually, what you start to do as a learner, actually, you start thinking, actually, how do I perform in this test? Actually, I'm not trying to demonstrate how I can perform, what my knowledge is. You're performing to an algorithm, you're performing to an AI agent, and how you get through that rather than that. So I think that's one of the biggest risks. Actually, you start to actually, I guess, pollute how people are learning, what people perceive assessment to be, and it becomes a performance art rather than trying to show how you can demonstrate your experience and knowledge.
Right, what a wonderful viewpoint there. And yeah, Sundar, what about you? What do you think?
Yeah, I want to build on what Liberty said. For me, I think the biggest risk isn't just technical failure. It's what I call scalable injustice. Think about what could happen when we deploy autonomous agents that can flag, block, or disqualify candidates at scale, but without meaningful human oversight. Right? We're not creating a technical problem. We're building a machine that can systematically potentially deny opportunity to the very people exams are supposed to enable. Right? It sort of sometimes keeps me up at night when these traditional systems fail. They typically would fail very slowly, right? You catch the errors, you have time to intervene. But with agentic AI, it can fail at the speed and scale of automation. So you can suddenly wake up and go, oh my God, the system has incorrectly flagged hundreds of potentially honest candidates overnight, right? So the damage is not just to the individuals, but it's the credibility of the examination system. And the risk is not just cheating, it's breaking the trust of every honest test taker who now has to prove that their innocence, they have to prove to the algorithm.
Right. I think you all of you talked about the same word, maybe in different constructs. Trust seems to be the common thing here. Breaking trust, the systems that end up breaking trust of the test takers or the awarding bodies and so on and so forth. So let's start with going to the basics. What problem is agentic AI really solving? And my first question on this is to Paul. What new exam security threats genuinely require agentic AI rather than just traditional controls? What do you think? What are the elements of exams that require agentic that you think only an agentic can solve?
I think the biggest challenge is around a lot of the work that's going on with operating system level assistance. So can agentic AI start to help detect works, things that go on in the background, operate below the browser level. So I think people don't just straight away think, oh, we need a lockdown browser. And lockdown browser it's not 1990s, but that's how I'm going to put it. It's like that's great then, but we've gone but way beyond that. So actually, can it be used to help track that? Because a human can't do that. A human can watch your facial expressions, they can watch your eyes, everything else. But actually, what you need to support, you need something that can to monitor these small changes happening. So having that, looking at things like multimodal. I think I've called it multimodal collusion, where cross-referencing, keystrokes, eye movement, all these things it can put together and actually say these things together do not look like a real person, or that it looks like something's happening that is not maybe as it should be. So, I think that's the thing. And I think something that Sundar said as well, actually, the scaling of it is the other side of it. So if you get it wrong, obviously it can go the wrong way. But obviously, if you get it right, it's a huge amount of I guess, productive efficiency to a testing program. You can scale it really, really quickly, really well, which you can't do with just humans. And I'm not saying humans are out of the loop. Humans are definitely not out of the loop here completely, but they need support. And I think we're all, I'm not going to speak on behalf of any of you, but I think when we've talked about it before in other contexts, we can't rely on just people.
Absolutely. And I think you brought out some very good elements there in terms of saying the system that can go way beyond what a human can see in front, right? The system can talk about what is the underlying stuff happening in your laptop, stuff that the human can't, a human proctor won't be able to do. My follow-up question to that, Sundar, is how do we distinguish between automation that genuinely improves exam integrity and automation that merely creates an illusion of control?
This is where I think we need to be brutally honest with ourselves, right? I want to build upon what you just said, what Paul also said, right? We could often confuse some activity with security because traditional AI will be fantastic at generating the activity. It will tell you the user looked away 50 times, they moved their lips 40 times, whatever had some ambient noise detected several times, and all of that is data, right? That's just a lot of data, but it doesn't translate necessarily to integrity. The agentic AI only improves integrity if it can act on intent, not just cataloging the behavior, right? So the illusion of control happens when you have a dashboard that's full of perhaps red flags, but you see no actual reduction in the malpractice. You're potentially just shifting the workload. Now, instead of proctoring the exam, you're proctoring the AI's alerts, if you will, right? So the test I use is the AI preventing the breach or is it documenting it really well? If all we're doing is building a bigger haystack of false positives for some human being to then review later, and they're really reviewing these flags actually after the exam is already over, then that really is for me the definition of illusion of control, right? So the real integrity will come when the agent acts as a deterrent, not just as a very expensive surveillance camera. So you mentioned, what happened with ACCA recently. They rolled back remote exams because they originally bought into the illusion that more monitoring automatically equals more security, but they really just expanded access without actually expanding the defense capabilities, right? So the security architecture that needs to scale with all of this should also have been built, right?
Right.
So sort of let's ask ourselves, is our AI a guard dog that prevents intrusions, or is it a scarecrow that looks intimidating but can't actually stop anything?
Right. And I think you brought out an important point there. Deterrence is very, very important. At the end of it, that's what you want. You don't want to be catching frauds all the time. You actually want to prevent fraud. I think that's the key. And you will prevent fraud when someone is trying to do the fraud, thinks that he or she can't fool the system anymore. I think building that in is very, very important. I think that's an important point. But do you think there are potentially problems that leaders today are trying to solve with AI that may be the wrong problem? Are they looking at the wrong problem altogether? Sundar, what do you say?
I don't think so. I think the goal again is not to just build the monitoring. It really just, as I said, to act on intent, not just cataloging the behavior, right? I think that's where we just need to make sure that focus is there.
Right. Great. So let's move to the next part, which is what is trust and defensibility really here, and how do you build some of these things? So Liberty, if I were to ask you, when agentic AI flags or escalates a potential violation, what condition must be met for it for that action to be trusted? So when agentic AI says the candidate has has done a mistake in the system, has tried to cheat the system, what is the condition that must be met for that action to be trusted by stakeholders, by the candidate, by the awarding bodies? What should it be?
I don't think it's just one condition. I think it's a combination of conditions. So I think that AI is only trustworthy when the evidence is clear, the reasoning behind the flag is explainable, the action aligns with the policy, a human is in the loop, especially if it's a high stakes decision, and then the response is proportionate to the risk. And I think that is maybe the most important part of this, is that how we respond based on an AI flag should represent how risky we think the behavior is. And I believe that more often than not, we tend to over-index on I think we overreact sometimes, right? So maybe there's a combination of flags that come together and it really does represent fraud, but I think we often mistake test-taking behavior, like just normal test anxiety kinds of behaviors, and call them fraud. So I think that's kind of an important piece that people overlook. So when you think about AI, the transparency of AI's reasoning, what I mean is the system has to make it clear what triggered the flag. So instead of saying an anomaly was detected, the system actually shows a candidate was looking at a second device, for example. The evidence has to be traceable, reviewable, and auditable. So there has to be observable evidence. If the AI claims that there's a second person in the room, then the human should be able to look at it and say, yes, there was a human in the room. An explicit alignment with exam policies. So you have a written policy around what behaviors are acceptable and what aren't. And the AI needs to align directly with that kind of predefined written policy. Humans in the loop, of course, critical. I don't see a future, maybe in 50 years or something, where AI is so smart that you don't need a human in the loop anymore. But right now, we have to have somebody who's making a human judgment, especially when it's a high stakes decision, like an exam. To revoke an exam is a big deal. So a human should be making that decision, not an AI agent. And then I mentioned the proportionality of the response based on the impact. So if you're really certain and you have human you have human oversight, then the decision makes sense, right, to maybe revoke it. But so an example of auto pausing an exam, if somebody leaves the view of a webcam, that seems reasonable. But if there's a webcam glitch, revoking an exam seems like it's probably a little bit over the top in terms of an appropriate reaction. So those are kind of, I guess, the 5-ish key elements that I think that goes into creating more of this trustworthy experience when it comes to AI, an AI agent in terms of proctoring an exam.
Right. I think you bring very important points. I think the entire thing about false positives, I think that's one thing that people keep talking about. There's a lot of false positives. When you build safeguards so strong, it sometimes mistakes genuine situations to be erroneous. And that really creates to a big issue in the system itself. And I think you bring the points out very well. Paul, if a candidate challenges an AI-driven security decision, what must an exam body be clearly able to defend?
I think a short way to put it, and I'll get into more depth, is actually a lot of times, I think probably up to now, you have people say, well, the AI said so. And that's not good enough, obviously. So we're now starting to get into this sort of legal ethical, and none of us, I don't think any of us on this call are lawyers, as far as I know, so we're not going to pretend to be. But I mean, it's sort of like the weight of evidence, effectively. So you're starting to look at how much is there an awarding motivation, can you show? It's not a single flag. I think Liberty started, it's multiple different things you start to stack up and say, actually, this is what you need to be able to show. It's, again, to pick up Liberty's point as well, the human loop audit trail, you need to still show. I think no one, and regulators, I should point out as well, regulators are in the UK certainly are not going to accept a decision that is made by AI. And whether that's because of the EU AI Act or because of just regulatory policy within a certain organisation, it's not going to allow you to turn around and say, well, the AI said so. You've got to have a human, you've got to have an expert involved in that. And I think it's something around this idea of there's a potential, if we're not careful, and I was just talking about this on a preparation session of actually an ATP panel that's taking place in a few weeks, and we came up with the phrase "guilty until proven human." Which is a dangerous place to where we could end up, because actually what you're starting to say to people, actually, how do we know the defense shifts from how do we know they cheated to how do we know actually was a human there? Because there are so many ways people can use agentic AI tools, potentially almost like a swarm attack, where you have one agent records a screen, one agent solving the problem, another agent actually maybe rephrasing the answer and feeding it back to the thing. There are so many different ways people can cheat potentially. You've got to, as an exam body or an award organization, try and defend. So is it guilty until proven human, which is really, really dangerous? Because as I think, and we were just talking about it actually with a lawyer who said, obviously, the phrase is, innocent until proven guilty normally. Actually, are we drifting towards a position where everyone always presumes that people have got such easy access to AI and to whether it's an open book type of exam or put more harder in a controlled environment, but we assume everyone's just using it to that point. There's almost that danger that, and actually you almost got to try and prove as a student, no, I wasn't using it, I'll be honest. And that becomes a challenge for the awarding organization as well. So that's more provocative. I appreciate that, but it's an interesting sort of term to sort of put out there. Yeah, sort of guilty until proven human is that where we end up with awful?
It's a scary thought, right? I mean, as a human, as a test taker, you're already under so much pressure. You've got to actually prove that you're not guilty. It's just piling up to the pressure. So while it's making life easier probably making easier for awarding bodies and democratizing exams, the influx of AI agents is actually commoditizing cheating in a sense. I kind of think that it's so easy to cheat today. It was probably deterrence probably was higher earlier. Now I think with so much of AI coming in, it's making cheating easy itself. Just adding on to the ACCA point, Paul, not just ACCA, any other rollback for that matter. What do you think leaders were thinking when they were thinking about rolling back, or when they actually roll back? What did they think it's a technical issue, technological issue? Did they think it's a governance failure? Where do you think their key rationale was when they tried to make the decision to go back to in-person testing?
I know, again, this is some insight, which is not. I used to work with British Council, people know, and worked with ACCA quite closely back then, and it was always a challenge for them to go to remote proctoring anyway. For the testing, they've always seen something was much more risky. They're a very risk-averse organisation, and I think that was one of the challenges. Obviously, COVID changed the world for everyone. It made people do things they didn't want to do, maybe, and I think there are certain situations with the technology that's available to potentially maybe the technology that's available to an award organisation may not be have the nuances to pick up some of these new things. So it can do is there two faces in the picture? Is there a different keyboard being used? But actually, some of these things we've been talking about already, maybe it can't capture. So if you're the organisation, I can see why you're saying, actually, we've got a really high stakes exam that's globally recognised, and can we trust that candidates are actually much more advanced than we are, or much more advanced than the technology we're using to detect it is? So we have to do something that we feel is much more traditional to us, much more controlled. Whereas I sit you in a room, I potentially wand you, I do all the things, and I control the equipment and I control the environment within reason that's within that room. And I think that's where a lot of organizations, not just ACCA, but others I've heard about, they just get nervous. And that's what it's almost, you go, anyone, a human nature, you go back to what you know. If this new thing doesn't work, you go, actually, I'll just go back and use the old way of doing this because I trust it. And we've said at the beginning, trust is the key word there. Whether it's right or not is a question, but the trust is there. Right.
I think the onus is then on the solution providers to actually build the framework of trust, because without that, clearly this is not going forward, it's going back. And we are going to lose all the benefits of scale and cost that we actually got over the last few years with agentic proctoring.
I just want to build on that very quick. I'm a huge, one of the things I've talked about confidence so many times is this whole ethics around digital divide, and actually things like remote proctoring open up the world to people who otherwise wouldn't be able to access certain types of assessment. And I think it would be a real shame and a sort of real criminal to the point where if we're taking things away because of, you say, if people either don't understand what's possible or the technology needs some more support, or you say the trust needs to be built. But there are people now who won't be able to take an exam in a much easier way to them because of decisions that have been made without all the information. And I think that's something I think we as an industry need to help people with.
Right, absolutely. So Liberty, what do you're from an organization that has a large number of certifications globally deployed. I mean, hundreds of thousands of people getting certified every year. Who do you think in an exam organization should be the accountable person for taking AI security-driven decisions in the entire testing organization? I'm talking of the roles that should be accountable for the AI decisions. Who are the people?
I think that a psychometrician should weigh in. I'm not biased at all, but I do think because there's measurement implications, right, around how you think about certain behaviors and how if you're apply security measures in the wrong way, that can really change the testing experience. And that stuff matters in terms of measurement because it's just adding unnecessary error. But other than that, I don't know if Microsoft is representative of all organizations, but I will say, like in my organization, we have somebody who manages the credentialing program. They would have to be involved in the conversation. And then I do think you need to have your leadership team to whatever level makes sense. Also agree. So our exam delivery provider is Pearson VUE, and they rolled out AI and proctoring a lot earlier than Microsoft was willing to allow them to use AI to proctor our candidates, which seems weird, right? Because Microsoft is all about AI. It's AI all the time here at Microsoft, but we were very hesitant to allow Pearson VUE to use their AI solution on our candidates because we didn't understand how the data it was developed on. We wanted to really understand. We needed a lot more transparency on how the AI worked, what the data it was built on, and all of those things than we felt comfortable with when Pearson VUE came to us and asked if we could do it. But over time, and a lot of that was because there was some stuff around responsible AI that from Microsoft's perspective that went into that conversation. But I think that our leadership team was very worried and I think mistrustful, even at Microsoft. So I do think you have to have that leadership sponsorship of a decision like this and make sure they really understand the pros and cons. And I think Microsoft in some ways was unusual because we did really recognize that there were more cons. We felt there were more cons at the time. Now, this was years ago, right? So, but there were more cons at the time than there were pros. But eventually we saw that it did seem to add value to the overall exam experience in a positive way. So we are using it. Of course, we're using it now, plus all sorts of, we are more likely to be, yes, let's try that when Pearson VUE wants to try something new when it comes to adding more AI. I'm going to say oversight, although I'm not a fan of the word, but into the proctoring experience, because I think that they have demonstrated over time that they are willing to get the data that we need so we can feel comfortable that we're doing right by the candidate and the experience and not adding unnecessary friction. That's always been a big thing for Microsoft is we don't want to add more friction to the experience than is already there by design. So I think it's kind of those three groups, right? The psychometrician, if you have somebody who's managing the credentialing program, just kind of as a program manager, and then the right level leadership team buy into a decision like that.
Right. Great. So that brings me to the third part of the conversation. It's about autonomy and human control. And I heard something very recently in one of the conferences I attended, the entire paradigm of human in the loop, on the loop, and out of the loop. And I found it fascinating that someone actually was able to kind of put everything into just this one statement of how we look at AI and how the interaction between AI and humans is looked at. So from that viewpoint, Sundar, in a real exam, high-stake exam operations, how should leaders think about this entire human in the loop, on the loop, and out of the loop paradigm?
I think the key decision is to map these models directly to the consequences of the decision, right? We don't need to start with the technology, but start with what happens to the candidate if the AI gets it wrong, right? So if I break it down, the human out of the loop should perhaps be reserved strictly for the technical decisions, enablement decisions. I'm just talking about checking bandwidth, verifying system specifications, auto pausing a test if the camera feed goes black for some period of time. So these are binary low judgment issues, right? There's no ambiguity here. Either the camera works or it doesn't. The machine can handle these, and honestly, it should, right? There's no value in putting a human into these, what I'd call routine technical checks. When it comes to human on the loop, that's almost for real-time friction management. If the AI detects a second voice in the room or some unusual screen activity, then the agent can, intervene immediately, right? Pause the exam or issue a warning. So it can act autonomously in the moment because you need that speed at that point. But here's the critical part, right? A human is actively monitoring the dashboard. They can readily override if the AI is hallucinating or if it's being overly aggressive, or if there is some context that the algorithm that the AI is acting on is it can't understand, right? So the human isn't actually making every micro decision, but they are watching the system work and can step in when needed. When it comes to human in the loop, for me, it's absolutely non-negotiable for any punitive action, if you will, right? If you're going to revoke a score or ban a candidate or label someone a cheater, if we're going to attach that word of, I call it dishonesty, or to someone's permanent record, a human must make that final decision, right? It's not a review, it's not an approval, it's actually making the decision. So we have to remember, we are not just processing data here, we are potentially impacting or destroying someone's career, their educational opportunity, their professional future. That level of consequence cannot be delegated to an algorithm, right? No matter how confident its probability score might look like. So the machine might surface the evidence, but a human really has to weigh the judgment.
Right. I think you put it very succinctly there. You said there are 3 levels of decisions that are getting taken in an AI controlled assessment, right? There is the absolute basic stuff, machine working, not working, camera working, not working, can be given off. Then there's the stuff where there's possibly a little friction where the human actually comes in. And the last part is where an important decision has been taken in terms of revoking test, etc., where the human actually has to come to the system. Liberty from that viewpoint, first of all, do you agree with the premise that you should divide exam decisions into 3 different buckets and have the human in the loop, on the loop, and out of the loop? And is there a decision? Are there security decisions that should always remain human in the loop, irrespective of how unimaginably technology proceeds forward? Is there something that should always be with humans?
Well, I think we like was mentioned, anything that is going to result in a sanction, an exam revocation, of course, a human should be in a loop. I will also add on top of what was said, if there's an appeal or a dispute, AI probably should not handle that. That needs to be a human. If there's some sort of ambiguous situation. So a lot of times I think about how someone with an accommodation, what AI will think about someone who's got an exam accommodation. So I think that it's even more important in those cases that a human be involved in any decision, because an accommodation allows the individual usually to do something that is not considered acceptable under normal test taking rules. So having if there was some sort of ambiguity about the situation, especially when it comes to those candidates with accommodations, a human absolutely needs to be in the loop. Of course, if there's anything that, if there's any legal or regulatory risk involved, the human should be making that decision, not AI. So I really think it comes down to any action that is irreversible or very difficult to remedy. That's when you always need to have a human in the loop. So if your decision is going to have a significant impact and you can't fix it easily, a human should be involved in making that decision.
Right. Paul, any finishing thoughts on that?
No, I think it's captured very well. I think everything around detection, it absolutely should be used. Investigation partially, it can be used AI, and sanction absolutely not, and then rulemaking never. So AI is great at enforcing rules. It shouldn't write them. That should be a human. So I think otherwise there's a danger. We talked in the beginning about the sort of loop about AI just regulating itself. And I think agentic AI particularly is a really, really good high-powered lens to help us do things, but it should never be the moral compass of what we do. So again, back to everything on sort of ethics and regulation and being in the EU, and people know that EU AI education is deemed as a high-risk thing. You can't use AI to make judgments that determine someone's future or determine an outcome in that way, in a high-stakes fashion. So legally, you won't be allowed to. But I think morally and everything we've talked about, it shouldn't do anyway. So you've got the legal, regulations saying you can't do it. And we've probably got people who own technology solutions or who own programs who think, actually, we could make this much cheaper if we could use certain things. Well, you can't. But I think that pressure, as we know from other industries, is going to be there. People who have, very, sort of very deep pockets will lobby and will make the change to happen where things are made more efficient, things are used, technology is used in a different way. And so even though now we're saying it can't be used to do this, I think we have a responsibility as I guess within the education industry and assessment industry to just sort of try and hold that line and say it's great at doing certain things we've all talked about, but there has to be a line, and we have to try and hold that line for as long as we can, I think. And I think we have lots of reasons to justify it, as we've already talked about as well, to hold that line. But I think there'll be pressure on us to change that, whether that comes from the awarding body, whether that comes from regulators, whether it comes from big tech, money elsewhere. I think we're going to have pressure on us to change.
Right. Great. Thanks a lot for all these viewpoints. And I think what's coming out very clearly for me is that we are not just talking of a technological shift. We are talking of a governance shift here. We need to look at defensibility first, especially when it comes to AI and agentic AI, to make it successful. We need to build the trust, the system, and it's upon us to do that. Credibility over everything else. I think that's the key. That's the key message that I'm getting here. But as with anything that involves a lot of technology, I can say that this discussion can go on for the next couple of hours, and I'm sure we'll not come to an absolute, clear framework. There's a lot of gray areas. There's a lot of stuff that we're touching on. But it's been a fascinating conversation with all of you. Thank you so much for spending time. And I think, and I want to leave the audience with this message that these are the kind of conversations that happen in the AI Dome advisory board meetings. We talk about ethics. We talk about how to further the cause of agentic AI. And AI Dome, incidentally, stands for Agentic AI Defense Orchestration and Monitoring monitoring for secure exams. We are growing. We want to grow more. We want to have more stakeholders coming to the conversations. So if anything that we said today resonated with the audience that is listening to us today, please feel free to reach out to us. We want to welcome you on board. The more viewpoints that come in, the better it is. So thank you so much for spending time, Liberty, Paul, and Sundar. And it was extremely wonderful to get these insights. And I look forward to seeing this conversation, just the beginning of much larger conversations going forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Right.